Okay, we have an interdisciplinary and international conference, and I realized that I really want to invite Conrad to give a talk about his work. Conrad is an artist. He's not a designer, he's not a planner, he's not an urban thinker, he's an artist who's really interested in landscape. And he's also American, living in Prague for a couple of years. So I think that combination of his background and of his nationality and of his experience of living in Prague is something that can be really beneficial for all of us. So I'm really happy that he accepted the invitation, and I will let you introduce yourself a little bit more, and I'm really looking forward for your presentation.
Well, first of all, thank you to Martina and to Henry and to anyone else who was involved in organizing this, and thank you for inviting me. Like Martina said, I've been here for 9 years. I originally came to teach English and not live in America, essentially, and I ended up studying my master's degree here at Umprum, and now I teach art and make art. It's essentially my life. So I thought I'd start by quickly showing you this project that I made in 2008. Because I feel like it relates maybe the most to the theme of the cultural landscape. So this project is called Relative Distance, and this is the first map I made for it. So what I set out to do was to make a model of the locations of my family across the world in Prague. Because at the time my brother was living in Mongolia, I was living here, and my sister, my mother and my father were all living in New England. So what I did was I chose these two kind of arbitrary scales, and I superimposed the world map on the map of Prague, and the anchor was my house. So I'm number 4, and I live here in Prague, and this is Prague on the world map also. So that was the anchor. So outside my house I went and I put a map with on a stand as a marker for me in this model. I then went to the other places in Prague that represented my family and put markers there with maps and an explanation and took photos. I then asked all the other family members to do the same in their areas. So I made similar maps using the same 2 scales, the local scale and this arbitrary world scale, and had them go install markers and take photos, etc. So I realized later that this scale I chose was quite large, so they had to drive like pretty far to get these things accomplished. So this is for my father. My father lives in Ipswich, Massachusetts, and so again, he's number 3. So he then had to go to 1, 2, 4, and 5 and take pictures. So this was all done through email, and everybody was very cooperative, except for my brother, who was complaining all the time that it was too much work and I should just make paintings of, I don't know, dead dogs and write things, crazy things on them, and isn't that what art is? So, but anyway, this is for my sister, East Hampton, Massachusetts. So this is the final result, yeah. So these are all printed photographs and mounted on the wall, but this is just a composite image. My critique of this project is that it's really hard for people to understand it most of the time. They have real trouble decoding it. So I can admit that it's not the most legible piece of work, but it was really fun to get the images back. I mean, the only photos that I took was this line, because this is all Prague. And it was really nice to get the images back because there were these little coincidences that happened that said something to me both about the place but also about my family. So this is a photograph that my father took in Ipswich, Massachusetts of the marker that represents my brother in Mongolia. And you can see it says, "Be careful with fire" in the back. And this is really appropriate for me because my father and my brother have the most problematic relationship in the family. So it was really, that made sense to me. But I enjoyed also this combining of this, basically the idea that appeals to me is that I have the luxury of living a pretty, comfortable international life. And for people like me, place doesn't have the same meaning as for someone who's maybe because of economic circumstances or because of lack of previous experience. It means something different to me because I can go other places and I can, You know, I can go on the internet, and it doesn't feel the same as it did when I was a child. And I grew up as a child in Kenya. I lived there for 10 years without a television, without anything. And then moving to America was like this incredible, I mean, I had the feeling when I got to America that everybody was rich, you know? I could totally understand why people at least used to think that. So my point is, this is sort of like a portrait of my family, but also a portrait of my circumstance, in that I have this ability to travel, and therefore I don't necessarily have this strong connection to places as someone who's stayed in the same place their whole life does. So that was relative distance. And the second project I'd like to show you, not this one, this one. Okay, so this is the first image in a series of work which has a kind of stupid name. It's called Mnemonosphere. And so these are all mnemonic images. And so mnemonic devices are essentially devices that help you, mental tricks that help you remember things. It's like when you make an association, you can remember things. And this has a connection to landscape in that I read a book many years ago, 10 years ago, called The Memory Palace of Matteo Ricci by Jonathan Spence. And this book is about a Jesuit missionary who was sent to China in the 17th century to essentially with the ultimate goal of converting the Chinese to Catholicism. And his main, one of his weapons, or so to speak, was his memory, because he had perfected the use of memory palaces, which, I mean, if you're not familiar, a memory palace is essentially an imaginary, at least one imaginary building. You start with a room that you picture this room, and in the room there can be furniture, sculpture, painting, decoration, and all of it is encoded it's all mnemonically encoded. So when you walk into this room, you see the chandeliers or whatever you've placed in it, and that helps you access information. So it's a real form of information technology, actually. And he had become so proficient at these systems that he could build them almost immediately. So there's an anecdote of him going into the court in Beijing, or Peking at the time, I guess, and memorizing instantaneously 500 names of people in the court, and was able to repeat them immediately. So I'm fascinated by this system as it stands in contrast to the age we're in now, where so much of our information is stored on devices. And I personally have trouble remembering really basic things that I should remember because I have it somewhere written down or I can access it. So I feel like even though there's a lot of information nowadays, people don't necessarily spend as much time internalizing that information because it's kind of not necessary. So I decided to work with this principle of mnemonic association, and the way I approached that was to start with something pretty basic, and that was the lungs. So this image is called lung larch, and it takes sort of the structure of the lungs, but it's flipped. The lungs are flipped upside down because that seemed to make sense to me. I don't know why. And as I went through the parts of the lung, I made these associations. Like whatever first association I made, then became the image. So for the larynx, I had it sounded like sphinx to me. For the trachea, I had a tray. For the primary bronchi, I had the bronx with an I. And so there are all these stupid kind of jokes throughout it all. And that is how I came to the final image. These are watercolor paintings on wood. They're about that big. This was an important technique for me because it has a brilliance to it. It doesn't come through in the slides, but it has a brilliance to it that is almost like almost as strong as a plasma display or something. It's really, you have to spend a lot of time preparing the wood to get it to the right, to get it to shine, but it's really worth the time. So as I went through these first four images, I decided to connect each one to the next somehow. So because I had used the image of the bronx in this one for the bronchi, this is the bronx here. The next image was about the history of the Bronx, and this is a timeline going from 1800 up to 2011, and there's about 20 different pieces of information hidden in it that, again, are encoded mnemonically. So, for example, this is the symbol for the city of Kherson in the Ukraine, and that is spelled in the Roman alphabet, spelled Kherson. And I have that image there because a very famous DJ came from the Bronx called DJ Kool Herc, spelled with a K, H-E-R, Kool Herc. So that was the connection there. And this section, this part of the flame, this is called Bronx Bonfire, and this part of the flame is the 1980s. So Kool Herc came out of the Bronx in the 1980s. I know, it's heavy, it's too much information. I know. Okay, so to continue. The third image is about Kherson, the city that I just showed you the symbol of in the Ukraine. Again, there are many jokes in here. My favorite is this one. This is a salmon with a rose coming out of it, a rose in bloom for Salomon Rosenblum, who was the original 007. He was like the real life 007, and he came from Kherson. So, okay, and there's a brain. This kind of ties the first four together. There's a brain because it's Ukraine, and I pronounce it Ukraine. So because I'm making these linguistic associations, everything relies heavily upon the language you're working in, the way you pronounce things, because some people don't say Ukraine, I say Ukraine, and also your cultural background. So what associations do you make? So a lot of this is very particular to me. If I gave this to somebody else to do in English as well, with the same process, same information, I'm pretty sure most of the images would come out completely different. So in a way, this is about these memory systems and everything, but it's also very much about me and about my particular cultural circumstance. So sometimes I'm using English when I use this process, but also because I speak Czech, Czech also sometimes helps me, and I make associations in Czech too. And if I spoke more languages, it would help, or it would be even different. So there's a really strong connection to the language as well. So this is the fourth image in the first four, and this is brain buggy. Again, the brain is upside down, and just again, because that seemed to make sense to me for some reason. And it's, again, it's the parts of the brain mnemonically encoded, essentially. So that was the first four. But I wanted to make something, and it also had these little symbolic paintings that went along with it to sort of help you key into it, the lungs, the Bronx, Kherson, and the brain. But I wanted to make something that was more connected to a specific geographical place. So this is called Lobster for Gloucester, and Gloucester is a city town north of Boston on the North Shore, which has a long fishing history, and they actually catch a lot of lobsters out of Gloucester, and those two words sound the same. So it's kind of, I did a residency in Gloucester 2 years ago, and so I made this image there, and again, it's a timeline from 1600 to 2011, and there's a normal lobster on the bottom and a rock lobster on top. That's because there's the town of Gloucester and the town of Rockport used to be one town, and then they separated. So right here, it's about 1820 here, and that's where the two lobsters separate and become two different towns. I really enjoy making these things. They take a lot of time, but you end up having to paint things that you never would have painted otherwise, like Margaret Thatcher smoking a cigarette, lighting a cigarette for these lighthouses on Thatcher Island outside Gloucester. And it was fun to do it in the place and to have local people come into the studio, and they could actually decode some of the images without my help, which was gratifying, although not all of them are that easy. I was simultaneously in that summer working on another image in Salem, Massachusetts, which is just a little bit south of Gloucester, which is famous for the witch trials, witch burnings, but it has a long history related to trade, actually. And so again, this is a similar principle, working with a timeline and encoding various types of information related to Salem's history along that timeline. So there's actually everything that's red here is related to the architecture, actually, architectural style. So for example, this is a Georgian flag back here for the Georgian style of architecture, which you can find in Salem. And then in the early 20th century, there was the Georgian revival, so there were two Georgian flags. But there are about 60 pieces of information hidden in this, and I won't bore you with all of them. But this was painted, this is a large painting, it's about 4 meters across, and I painted it directly on the wall in Salem in a friend's print shop. So, and you can see it from the street, so I'm really happy that it's there and it continues to be part of Salem now. It's there, you know. That is really important to me. And so my friend Victor did the same residency the next summer, and he's from Moravia actually, but he went to the same place and then reinterpreted all the symbols in a new composition. So now these two paintings are side by side there. And, so there's a connection, strong connection now between Prague, Salem. I like it. So I continue to work on this series. These images take a long time to develop, but at the moment I'm working on one that's related to New England. It's about a war that happened in New England in the 17th century called King Philip's War that very, very few people know about. It was the original Revolutionary War. Basically, most of the tribes around Boston or in the New England area, the Algonquin tribes, the Indian tribes, most of them rose up against the colonists and tried to exterminate them, basically. The colonists won, of course, but it's an interesting war in that it was only documented by one side, and that was the colonists. They were the only ones writing anything down. The Indians were not doing that, you know. So all the history that survives of it is very one-sided, and it's an interesting study of how language is used in war. So it relates back to the language. And I find New England fascinating because it's covered with Indian names. I mean, Massachusetts, Connecticut, these are Indian names, you know, and people don't know what they mean. And it's, you know, it's everywhere, and it's something you just don't, you kind of accept. But if you ask the average person from Massachusetts what does Agawam mean, they have no idea. And I know a few of them, but you know, I don't speak any Algonquin language, but I am interested in this phenomenon of leftover place names. It's similar in Australia, you know. Again, you have these Aboriginal names that have this strong, they tell you something about the land. And yet nowadays people kind of have the luxury of ignoring that because most people, I mean, in developed countries at least, don't have a direct relationship to the land. They don't grow their own things. They can drive and fly, and it doesn't matter so much. So in that vein, I will just tell you about a project I did related to Czech Republic, where I simply made a recording of myself reading all of the place names in the Czech Republic, all the towns, villages, cities, everything, which took me 8 hours approximately. And so I just read them all and I recorded it, and that's it. You know, I'm not going to play it for you because it's not, you know, but it's a type of thing, like my pronunciation is good, but it's not perfect, and some things are really hard to pronounce. Like some place names here are really hard to pronounce. So when you hear the recording, you can hear that it's in alphabetical order and they're Czech towns and cities, but you can hear that my accent is there as well. So this is an important part of it. But it was fascinating for me just to read all the place names, to realize that there are hundreds of place names named in Czech Republic, Lhota, which means like village, basically. You know, it's just village, 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 village. You know, and then suddenly a place called Sharp Rock or something like this. You know, but what I find fascinating about the place names here is that a lot of them really give you some important information about the place, like, you know, good, Dobrá voda, or you know, like good water or something like this. You know, that there's some direct connection to the geography of the place, or what services are there, or something like that. So those are the two projects that I feel are the most connected for me to landscape. I mean, I also spend time, of course, working from landscape. I love going out and just drawing from landscape as well, but that I find is more of an academic exercise. It doesn't necessarily, I don't think about that landscape on another level most of the time when I'm doing that. This is a combination of the two projects I just showed you, relative distance and these mnemonosphere images. So I took the same scale from relative distance and I had an exhibition in Česká Skalica, which is here, and I found if I used that same scale on my model of Prague as the world, what would be Česká Skalica? And Česká Skalica would be somewhere between, this is the moon, so it would be in what's known as cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon. So then, this is a mnemonic image about cislunar space and about plans for the development of it. And so it's a loon, this bird is a loon, and that's my sister. So it's cislunar. Okay, ha ha ha. Okay, so that's the heavy images. That's like, these are the complicated things that I wanted to quickly tell you about. And now I will show you some less complex works. This is the painting that Martina has. It's actually not a painting, it's a digital drawing. And this I made on the day of Václav Havel's death, or the day after. So it's kind of like for him. But it's Prague, you can see underneath it. And then it's just a very quick sort of, on top of it I put this ring of symbols that I felt quickly, just came to me very quickly that illustrate the life cycle. So you have like a pacifier, like, you know, a piece of Lego, you know, it's like childhood to death basically, and then it's reflected in the afterlife, and there's skulls underneath everything because death is always with us. And it's also a compass that's north, south, east, west, and it's also the seasons. And it's also a 24-hour clock imposed on that. So it's like, but this one is less, you know, it doesn't have as detailed explanation of exactly why everything is the way it is. It's more intuitive. So I like doing those things. So now I can show you some things. This is a recent project that has more to do with social space. And it's very simple. It's called Draw Me. And essentially what I did was I went out into public places here and I set up a sign and an easel and some drawing materials and a sign that says, draw me, I pay you £1 a minute. And I just sat there and I waited for people to come and draw me, and I counted the time and I paid them. And while I was doing this, I had a secret photographer who was pretending, you know, he was pretending to be a tourist. So he was far away and it wasn't clear that it was being documented, which I think is really important with performance in particular, because if you see somebody documenting it, then you know it's a performance and you can kind of dismiss it a little bit. So anyway, so people came up, they drew me. I tried not to communicate with them. I tried to stay totally neutral. And they made these portraits, and I find the portraits to be, I can really see myself in these portraits, every single one of them. So these are just stills from the video. And it was really fun to do because people react so positively to the flipping of this relationship. Like, they couldn't believe that I would pay them to draw. So many people are like, said to me, oh, but I can't draw. You know, I can't, you know, and one woman came up to me and was like, what are you doing? Who are you? You're a really strange person. Your behavior is really strange. And I didn't answer her, you know, and she was quite frustrated by that. But it's, you know, I like that act of sometimes just taking a normal situation and trying to just flip it a little bit and see what happens. And I think that relates so the way the mnemonic images relate to my life here is the aspect of language, definitely, because I hadn't really thought about language as much before. I only spoke English when I moved here. I had never spoken another language like a lot, you know, fluently or even close to fluently. So that's the connection here. The landscape, the relative distance, the connection is to being separated from my family and living a like global life or international life. And the connection here for me is the sense of private space in the Czech Republic, where people are more reserved. I mean, you know, you don't go up and just start talking to people on the tram usually. And every time I go home to the States, I'm always struck by how I get into conversations as soon as I step off the plane with people I don't know. You know, because there's a different social space, and it takes me a while to get used to it. So this is related to that, I think. Partially because I felt quite vulnerable in that they were looking at me and drawing me, but on the other hand, I was being quite defensive by not communicating with them. So, there we go, yes. Some people, you know, obviously had taken some drawing courses. But it was also interesting to see people from different nationalities come up. This little girl from Korea spent 20 minutes just watching me And she was so shy, and so finally I had to give her a bit of encouragement, and then she came and she spent 20 minutes making this drawing of me. Okay, so I'll show you something quickly, also related to life in the city and transport. So I ride my bike a lot, and I don't drive. I've never driven, and it's one of the reasons I love living here, because I don't think having a car would make my life any better here. Like, it would be annoying and not, yeah. So, but as a cyclist in Prague, which doesn't have a proper cycling infrastructure, and I don't think it ever will, because it doesn't have the space for it. You know, it wasn't bombed, it's not Dresden, it's not Berlin, it doesn't have big boulevards, there's not space to put bike lanes everywhere. I understand that. But also I think people here drive unnecessarily a lot, and a lot of people who do drive have a very antagonistic relationship with cyclists. So I made a very simple video here where I created this helmet. Now if it will play, that would be nice. Okay. There we go. Yes, I made this helmet of a SUV that I built around my own helmet, and then I just rode around the city. And you can see I painted myself black to be a little less visible. It has nothing to do with racial politics or anything. I just wanted the car to stand out. So yeah, I just rode around, and it was incredible at how positive the reaction was. You know, like this little act of making yourself look like an idiot. Suddenly the cars treated me really well. Like, people would drive by and be like, honk, honk, like awesome, you know. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Yeah, this is a good shot, this one. The video is quite long, but there are also a few night shots that I'll show you. If I can find, no, I don't know. Oh, well.
Is it somewhere online?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's like ridiculously long for YouTube.
I think cars, they were more respectful to you?
Much more respectful. Yeah.
So big hammer.
Yeah, because I was like one of them, you know. I don't know. So, yeah. So this is a.
You had to have on your back the reserve wheel.
The what?
The reserve wheel on your back.
Yeah, that's true. I should have done that. But then I saw there were some copycats, some people who made the same helmet in Prague at one of the cycle rallies. But it's okay. I think it's good. I wish I had had like 20 other people with me with the same thing. It would have been great, like a traffic jam of cars. So this one is doesn't require as much explanation, and I don't know how to get to the night ones. All right. Okay. All right, and then lastly, I can just show you some more standard paintings, which again don't have as much explanation behind them, but these are so these are fetish. I call these fetish paintings, and they're for me, a fetish is something that makes you feel comfort. You know, that gives you comfort, something that you hold on to because it's part of your identity or your history, and you don't want to let it go because of that. And I think we have those things all around us. But I was thinking about structures, buildings, and things like this. And so this is actually about the same size. The projection is about the same size as the painting, and this is the International Space Station. But it's painted from a model. So these paintings go with little cardboard models that I make. So I painted this from the model I made of the International Space Station. So it's quite abstracted and simple. And the ISS for me is an interesting fetish in that it doesn't really have, it's not really in space. It's constantly falling towards the Earth, and it has to keep itself up with power. They're actually accelerating all the time to keep themselves up there. They're not actually in proper orbit. To do that, they'd have to be way closer to the moon. There are 2 points by the moon. There's L1 and L2, where the Earth's gravity and the moon's gravity kind of balance out, and there you could park a space station, but that's really far away. So in a way, it's kind of, I think it has much more to do with human I don't know, our visions of ourselves as this space-going civilization, but in fact it's very connected to the Earth, you know, and reliant on the Earth. And also the function of it is disputable. I mean, they don't necessarily do all that much up there, but I'm a fan of it. But anyway, so that's why I see this as a fetish of a scientific fetish in a way. This is Borobudur in Java, but again painted from a model I made of it. So I think it's the second biggest Buddhist temple that I visited, and then around it we have the Large Hadron Collider. So again, this is like a religious monument, or also fetish, I would say. And the LHC for me personally is more of a fetish than the ISS, because it's the largest instrument ever built, largest scientific instrument ever built. But both of them for me are like temples to something, to the unknown, but also that reflect our idea of ourselves as beings who search for meaning and search for, that's it. And then the last one, this is an oil platform, and this is about the search for oil. And this, I don't know. But so they're also, I don't really have the images of the, I can show you what the little models kind of look like. So these are other models that I made. There's in the middle you can see the oil platform. So these models have kind of have this quality of a fetish object, like handmade and things like that. Okay, so I think that's kind of enough. Are there any questions quickly?
For you, what are the main differences between American or Western landscape, Czech landscape, or landscape of post-communist country? What do you would say that it's the most striking differences?
The scale and the sense of public and private. And so the scale, of course, is different in that here I've already internalized this sense that Germany, like Dresden, is really far away. It's really far away. Like, I don't have time to go there this weekend. I can't, it's too far away. And it's only a couple hours, whereas in the States, I mean, you just take it for granted. Oh, we can, New England is like, oh, we'll drive from New York to Boston, it's not a big deal, So there's that totally different scale that I experience, definitely. And the other striking thing is the sense of public and private, because here, if it doesn't have a fence around it, it's public. I mean, you can go there. Like, if you see a field, you can walk on the fields, And in the States, there are not as many fences, but there are a lot of invisible fences. You can't just start walking into the forest. You'll see a sign that says no trespassing, And I really felt it this summer because I did a big bike trip across Massachusetts, and I was looking for somewhere to get water, to just ask somebody for water, and there was nobody outside their houses for hours and hours and hours. There was nobody outside. They were either in their cars or in their houses, and I didn't want to go and knock on anybody's door. I was going to wait until somebody was outside, and it took so long, So there's, there are cars and there are houses, but there's not this sense of community that comes from that larger scale, I guess. So those are the two most striking differences. But also and the third one, last one, is that here you have, it's incredible that forests have been preserved and are managed, and this place hasn't been completely, deforested. But all the same, it's hard to go somewhere that feels really wild, And even New England, which was almost entirely deforested, and all the forest there is young, still you have much more of this sense or I have much more of a sense of this wild wilderness. So, thanks very much.
Thank you.